What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the world of true crime. This channel will take you on a journey through some of the most shocking and disturbing cases of crime and injustice. From unsolved mysteries to notorious criminals, we will explore the dark side of humanity and the lengths people will go to in order to get what they want. Join us as we uncover the facts behind some of the most notorious cases of all time. Now, in this video, we will be going over a very peculiar missing persons case. In addition to this, we have also added several bonus short stories at the end of this video. All true crime, all for your listening pleasure. So for those of you who like to fall asleep while you listen to these, I'm hoping this suits your needs a little bit better. Without further ado, let's talk about one of the strangest disappearances you will ever hear about. So we've all heard of cases where teens go missing, and parents, for whatever reason, wait an extended period of time to actually fill out a missing persons report. For example, Harley Dilley and Joshua Maddox, both found deceased stuffed in chimneys, and both not reported missing for quite some time. Well, Harley's parents waited 3 days, whereas Joshua's father waited a solid week. But there is yet another case out of Moore, Oklahoma that may just rival them both. So a 15-year-old girl goes missing back in June of 1992, and her parents didn't just wait a few days, weeks, or even months. As a matter of fact, they would wait well over a year prior to actually filling out that missing persons report. Here's what happened during that period. Well, her father, Chuck, had just picked up his wife, stepdaughter, and biological son from a church trip, and upon letting them into the vehicle, he simply states, "She's gone again." This is in reference to Monique Daniels, the girl who had just gone missing. He claimed that a few days ago he had gone fishing with his 2 oldest sons, and upon their return, Monique was simply gone. And while she did have a history of running away in the past few months, this time things would prove to be a little bit different than all the others. When they arrive home, his youngest daughter, Angelique, notices a few things. For starters, the house is in complete and utter disarray. There are beer bottles, trash, and cans just strung out all over the place. In addition to this, there are cigarette butts all over the mantle of their fireplace. Now, this was completely out of character for Chuck. More so, neither of her 2 parents seemed to be even remotely worried as to the whereabouts of Monique. Well, a total of 6 months go by when, out of the blue, Candace Daniels, her mother, receives a few letters as well as 1 phone call from Monique stating she's gotten married, had a child, and she's moved to Alaska. Well, this is the last instance anyone would hear anything from Monique, and here's where things begin to take a drastic turn. A relative by the name of Leslie Westick came to visit from Michigan, and while prior to showing up, Leslie had no idea that Monique had ran away. And so, completely alarmed by this, she immediately begins asking questions, wanting to see the letters as well as the missing persons report. Upon seeing those letters, she says, "I really think the best thing you can do is to hand these in to the police. That way, at least they have something to go off of. Heck, maybe they can even do a handwriting comparison to see if this is really Monique. I'm not fully convinced this is her handwriting." And so while they all agreed to this, those letters would allegedly get stolen during a home burglary that occurred within days of having this conversation. And you guessed it, before the police were even notified of their existence. So at this point, Leslie gets completely fed up and begins reaching out to other relatives, and only when they begin to question Chuck and Candace do they actually fill out that missing persons report. Yeah, and if you think that's weird, trust me when I say we are only getting started. About a year after Monique's disappearance, Angelique heads on over to Michigan in order to spend some time with her aunt, Leslie. It was during this stay Angelique stated the following: "Not only were the letters and the phone call a complete hoax, but Chuck had actually driven Angelique to Dallas, Texas, and made her write those letters to her very own mother." Now, leading up to this point, she had suffered through a lot of rather nasty abuse, thus feeling intimidated by Chuck to write them. And so another week goes by before Angelique heads back home, spends a few nights, packs her things, and flees right back over to Michigan to move in. Well, when she goes missing, they immediately fill out a missing persons report, and shortly thereafter receive word she has actually moved in with Leslie and is refusing to come home. It was at that point they request her extradition back to Oklahoma. But what they didn't know is that as soon as Angelique arrived, both her and Leslie contacted Child Protective Services and opened up about everything that had been going on. Now, this would range from the child abuse all the way up to the fact she had been forced to fake those letters. This, in turn, would lead to law enforcement ultimately refusing that request. So now, not only has an investigation been opened up against Candace and Chuck related to the abuse, they are also being interrogated as to the whereabouts of their daughter Monique. And here it is, in relation to the disappearance of Monique Daniels. When Candace and Chuck were asked to take a lie detector test, They both refused. But when applying a little pressure during one of many interrogations, Chuck would finally admit the letters and the phone call had all been fake. And here's the real kicker. On the very day of Monique's disappearance, Chuck stated he took his two oldest sons fishing. However, those two kids eventually came forward, stating this was simply not the case. While they were supposed to go, it had been raining all day long. So instead, they decided to run out, grab some fast food, and come back home. But upon arriving back home, Chuck goes inside and tells them to sit in the car until he allows them in. Well, a full hour passed by before that happened. When the boys finally were allowed inside, Chuck told them Monique had simply ran off. Now, one thing that they remember as being immediately off is that their little brother's room had been locked. In addition to this, it would remain locked for the next 2 days. Upon waking up on that third day, they noticed it was finally open. Now, while there was nothing immediately off inside that room, they did notice there was now an oil drum sitting in the bed of Chuck's pickup truck. And later on that same day, Chuck drives off for a few hours. When he returned home, there was no oil drum. They also went on to state this was the one and only time they had ever seen an oil drum in his truck. This has never been fully addressed by Chuck himself. More so, Monique is still considered to be a missing person to this day. This is what she may look like as of now. Now, it's also worth noting Angelique has cut all ties with Chuck and Candace, and while they would go on to plead guilty to charges of child abuse, no further evidence of Monique's whereabouts have ever been found. And still, to this very day, Angelique does everything she can to find her sister, stating, "Someone has to be her voice. Somebody out there has to fight for her, and I will never stop that fight." And that is why I personally think this is one of the most aggravating cases I have ever looked into. Now, it's worth pointing out, there are many theories floating around out there as to what may or may not have happened. But I gotta tell you, a heck of a lot of them point straight towards Chuck and Candace. So that's it, y'all. That is gonna do it for this particular story. If you're interested in hearing more, just stick around as we delve right into downright creepy things that have happened in Michigan. Coming in at number 1, we have the actual murder that inspired the movie Jeepers Creepers. A husband and wife are passing by this abandoned schoolhouse when they notice a green truck, as well as a man carrying what looks to be a blood-soaked sheet with a body inside it. Well, just a few miles later, this truck is now barreling up behind them, and it would follow them menacingly for a good few miles before turning off. It was at this time they decided to go back and get his license plate, and when they pass by him one more time, he is now changing the plates, and there is a substantial amount of blood within the vehicle. This man's name was Dennis DePue, and he had just recently murdered his ex-wife in front of his own children. Next, we have a woman from Detroit who would poison 14 customers as a result of being demoted at work. You see, what happened was when her job title changed from cook to dishwasher, she took it upon herself to start placing arsenic in the biscuits. And even though there was a substantial amount of evidence linking her to this crime, she was able to get off on all charges. This woman's name was Rose Barron, and several members of her own family would die under mysterious circumstances just a year prior. In addition to this, she will be the sole claimer of their life insurance policy. Before we get to number 3, I would just like to say if you are into this sort of thing, I have several playlists on my page, of which contain more thorough videos of strange happenings. Last but definitely not least, we have what I like to call Detroit's very own Hinterkaifeck murders, otherwise known as the St. Euban Street Massacre. Back in the late 1920s, a man by the name of Benny Evangelist claimed to be hearing the voice of God. It was at this point he filled his basement with these creepy wax dolls, started a cult, and began writing his own Bible. Well, on the very night that that Bible was published, he, along with his wife and 4 children, were brutally murdered by someone with an axe throughout the house. And Benny himself was found to be sitting in a prayer-like position with his head sitting in a chair several feet away. The killer was never found. And those are just a few of the downright creepy things that have happened in Illinois. Coming in at number 1, we have the claustrophobia-inducing tale of Brett Morrow. Back in 2017, a company is relining a 24-inch sewer line in the town of Streamwood. Well, at some point during this process, the material begins to get stuck, and Brett Morrow would climb the 20 feet down into this manhole and begin his 30-foot trip inside the pipe. And as he begins pushing on this material, unbeknownst to him, it is now bunching up behind him as well, effectively sealing him into this little tiny pocket 30 feet away from the entrance. It was at this point that the fire department was notified
notified and a rescue op began. They would spend the next 4 hours cutting through this material in an attempt to reach Brett, but unfortunately by the time they got there, he had long since passed away. Upon further investigation, they would discover that he had drowned after passing out due to lack of oxygen. The puddle was only about 3 inches high. Next, we have a group of 4 men who would prowl the streets of Chicago in the late 80s abducting women. They would then take them back to one of their homes and begin to torture them for hours, sometimes days. These individuals together would be known as the Ripper Crew. So how did they get that name? Well, let's just say they had a habit of removing a specific body part. The official kill count of the Ripper Crew is 18, but if you add in an altercation they had with some young men one night, that number goes to 20. And here's the kicker. One of those men has since been released. It is now living his best life amongst you, Illinois, so good luck with that. Before we get to number 3, I would just like to say if you are into this sort of thing, I have several playlists on my page, of which contain more thorough videos, including the first 2 you just heard. Lastly, we have one of the most terrifying crimes you have probably never heard about. Late one night back in 1874, an intruder enters the back door of a family's farmhouse. He would then head straight to the master bedroom and bludgeon a mother along with her 3 children right where they lay. It is presumed at this point the father, Carl, heard the commotion and entered to see what was going on. Unfortunately, after putting up a hell of a fight, he himself would be struck down. In addition to this, it is very much believed that this was a personal attack on the man himself. Reason being is he was beaten so bad he was almost unrecognizable. It was at this point a family friend sleeping on the couch also came to the family's aid, but unfortunately he would succumb to injuries as well. Not a single person inside the house that night would survive. Now, there was this guy at the time who had attempted to buy their property several times before. It is believed that when the family refused to sell, he wiped them all out in order to bring the land up for public auction. Although this man along with an accomplice were tried, they were never convicted. And those are just a few of the downright creepy things that have happened in Texas. In August of 1990, a couple is forcefully removed from their vehicle while sitting in Lover's Lane. They are then taken to the woods where they would be toyed with for hours before having their lives ended. The boyfriend, Andy, would be found tied to a tree along with a few balloons as if they had been playing some sort of sick and twisted game with him. Further investigation would show that he was discarded second, all the while having to watch what was happening to his girlfriend. Although the crime bears resemblance to that of another murder, both cases remain unsolved to this day. Next, a yogurt shop located in Austin becomes home to one of the most gruesome unsolved crimes the state has ever seen. December 4th, 1991, just after 11 p.m., 1 to 4 individuals enter the establishment and take the lives of all 4 women inside. When everything was said and done, they would stack them on top of each other and light the place on fire. One of the 4 victims would survive the initial attack and make her way across the shop. Unfortunately, she would fail to make it out before succumbing to her injuries. While there have been a list of suspects, including a group of 4 teenagers, no one has ever been charged for this crime. It is said that to this day, investigators are still looking into this case. Before we get to number 3, I would just like to say if you are into this sort of thing, I have several playlists on my page, of which contain more thorough videos of strange and dark happenings. Last but not least, we have a place known as the Killing Fields. And while yes, I know that this list is creepy things that have happened, there are over 30 instances in which people have been murdered and placed onto this plot of land. Whether the action itself occurred somewhere else, most of the victims were young women and children. Initially, it was presumed to all be the actions of one person. However, over time, there have been several inconsistencies between all of these victims, meaning it is more than likely more than one person. And this has been Worst Things to Happen on TikTok, Episode 1. Lamo. Downright tragic in every way. So leading up to 2020, Lamo, a 30-year-old woman from Tibet, had accumulated about 200,000 followers on the platform. That being said, she lived a relatively simple life alongside her mother and her father on the family farm. And most of her content involved Lamo educating her viewers as to what life was like as a female farmer in that part of the world. In essence, every single time she was on that camera, there was always this really uplifting aura that just really seemed to resonate with her her viewers alongside of the wholesome content she had been putting out, and you could tell they very much enjoyed this. Well, little did they know, Lamo had been going through hell for quite some time, in the form of an abusive ex-husband. See, back when Lamo was 18, she married a guy named Tang Lu, and somewhere along the way, after they had already had kids, Tang became extremely abusive towards Lamo. And for years, Lamo would turn to various organizations and law enforcement for help. However, time and time again, she would be denied. That is, till June of 2020. After years and years of going through this abuse, she is finally granted a divorce. However, Tang is to maintain custody of their children. It was at this point she moved back to the farm with her mom and dad. And immediately after this divorce, Tang starts showing up to the farm uninvited, threatening to end their children's lives if she doesn't get back together with him. And with every threat, Lamo would fill out a report, yet nothing would be done. And here's where things get a whole lot worse. One night in September of 2020, Lamo is live streaming to about 400 people, and at some point, a great deal of commotion can be heard off camera. And as Lamo turns around to try and figure out what's going on, you hear an extremely loud series of blood-curdling screams before the camera shuts off. They had just witnessed one of the most disturbing and heartbreaking incidents to ever occur on this platform. Tang had broken into her house with a can of gasoline, poured it all over Lamo, and just like that, Lamo would spend the next 2 weeks in the hospital fighting for her life before ultimately succumbing to her injuries. In addition to this, Lamo's story would cause immediate public and international outcry. People from all over the world would start using the hashtag LamoAct. This was mainly due to the fact that even though there were organizations put in place to assist women going through these issues, that system was simply not working. As a matter of fact, that same year Lamo was killed, over 900 women would go on to lose their lives at the hands of their very own husbands in China. Less than a few months later, Tang's death sentence would be carried out. Furthermore, the remnants of this case are still being felt to this day.
Now lastly, we ran into a great deal of interest as to what happened with their children after all of this went down. And luckily, I was able to get in touch with one individual who had been following the story on Weibo, sort of like China's version of Reddit. And allegedly, one of Lamo's sisters was found on that site talking about how she was fighting for custody at that time. However, no further information has ever been revealed. That being said, I hope you all enjoyed this video. And I hope you have an amazing whatever it is, wherever you may be. Peace out.